Welcome to the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy, where Sunday's sermon sparks Wednesday's conversation. Each week, they sit down to dive deeper, reflect thoughtfully, and wrestle with the themes of this week's message. Their goal is to explore faith more fully, ask the hard questions, and invite you into a dialogue that goes beyond the pulpit.
Welcome into the podcast, everyone. I'm Pastor Randy Moore.
And I'm Pastor Andy Payton.
It's an exciting day today because we have a special guest.
I'm very excited.
Podcast.
Yes,
yeah.
My very good friend, Rabbi Mazo from the synagogue here in Evansville.
Yes.
And Gary and I served together on the Mayor's Interfaith Council here in Evansville. And we thought it would be fun to bring him on and just have a conversation today.
We share a common history.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And every time I bring Gary, anytime I have a conversation with Gary, I just learn so much. And I thought it'd be wonderful to have him on for a conversation today as well.
It's the beauty of those interfaith relationships and efforts that we have in the community. They're so important. No one's trying to convince anyone that they're right and someone else is wrong. Everybody gets to be who they are.
Oh, absolutely. I've said this to you before, Randy, when we've done interfaith stuff here at Methodist Temple, I always find it strengthens my faith because we have so much in common. Mm-hmm. And we have our shared dreams and shared visions so often about what we hope for in the world. And I'm sure that's going to be the case today as we learn from Gary.
As all things, it can probably be summarized loving God and loving neighbor. Right?
Yes, generally speaking, that's a good direction.
Yeah, that's a good direction to go in. Yeah.
So, let's welcome Rabbi Gary on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, can you see us, Gary?
Yeah, I can see it.
All right. Yeah.
Great.
Welcome to the Pastor Podcast. We're so pleased that you've decided to able to join us today.
Well, thanks for having me. This is, and look what Randy just said. These opportunities for interfaith dialogue. I think what we always learn is that there's the thread that unites us is so much greater than any of the differences that might divide us. But we never know that until we take the time to kind of learn from each other and talk.
Right, exactly.
I remember years ago, this was probably like 30 years ago, Dr. Muhammad Hussein came to my Sunday school class at Aldersgate United Methodist Church. And I'll always remember what he said, and I'm going to paraphrase. He's like, "You be you. I mean, don't hold back. Celebrate what you believe and celebrate your faith. You don't have to hold back for me." And I think that summarizes the interfaith dialogue pretty well, don't you, Gary?
Yeah, no, I absolutely do. do. One of the most meaningful. So we always have our rabbinic conventions every year. I'm sure you guys have them as well. And one year we were in Montreal, and it just so happened that the Dalai Lama was there having his convention, and it was arranged for him to speak to us. We had an audience with him. We got to meet him. And one of the things that he said that still sticks with me to this day is, he said, your truth is just that. Your truth is true. My truth is true. Mm-hmm. The truth for Christians is true, and may we never try to convince somebody that our truth is the only way. Let's learn about each other's truth and, make the world a better place. That's kind of sums up, I think, so for so many of us, the way we try to live our lives in our faith.
Well, I think when it comes to relating to people, this rings true. For instance, I grew up here in Evansville, Indiana, and I grew up before desegregation. And so it wasn't until I was in 7th grade that I ever met a black person. And I probably had some level of fear, if not some racism before that, but getting to know my classmates who were black at Harper Elementary School made all the difference in the world. And the same thing holds true for people who are not like us when it comes to our sexual orientation. And it's just a matter of relating to people, and then you can get over a huge hump.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Absolutely. And it's, this, for us as Jews, this work is obviously hugely important. There's no shortage of Christians in Evansville, Indiana, right? We're the only synagogue for almost 100 miles in any direction. So it's really so important, for people to just learn the commonalities and learn what we share. And the only way we do that is if, I get out in the community, if we do these community efforts, if we get people into the synagogue to learn from us. Otherwise, we're operating on, misconceptions, stereotypes, and a lack of education. And so we need to keep doing this work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, why don't you just tell us a little bit how you got to Evansville, Gary? A little bit about your own story and journey.
It's a sort of a circuitous path. So I grew up in New England. I'm a native New Englander, and I grew up in Connecticut. Went to college in Boston. Our seminary, we used to have a campus in Cincinnati that has since closed, and now it's LA and New York and Jerusalem. So it's 5 years of seminary education for us. My first pulpit was in southern New Jersey, which had its own unique challenges. I was there for about 10 years and then moved to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, that's where the kids were really raised. Beautiful place. Congregation was challenging as well, but stayed there, raised our kids there. And when our youngest daughter went off to college, we realized we were kind of living on an island, sort of isolated. The kids were never coming back, and that we could sort of have an adventure. So our system, we don't have a bishop, we don't have a hierarchy. It's very much of a free market economy. As long as you're in good standing with our rabbinic union, your resume is circulated, you get a list of all the jobs that are available, and then you're kind of on your own. So I interviewed all over the country. Had never honestly heard of Evansville, Indiana. This was one of the stops along the way. They did a great job during the process. It was the right size congregation for what I was looking for. It's a long process for us. It's about 10, 11 months, and hopefully, you're making the right decision. The congregation's making the right decision. Gloria and I figured, if it doesn't work, well, 4 years, we try something else. And, now we're starting year 14, and I'll be here until retirement, and it's been great for us. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how we got here.
Yeah. Now, in Evansville, there's quite a history in terms of the synagogue in the life of Evansville, too. I'm curious, could you just share a little bit about the history here?
Sure. So, the earliest Jews in America, actually, as we were celebrating the 4th of July last weekend, we read George Washington's letter to the Jews of Newport, Rhode Island, in the Touro Synagogue, the oldest synagogue. And he wrote that letter in about 1790. Most Jews in America started coming around the 1830s, 40s, 50s, and then into the early 20th century. So in Evansville, Jews started coming here in the early 1850s and formed a synagogue. Usually they would form a school and then form the synagogue. Reform Judaism started in Germany in the 1840s, spread to America, officially became sort of one of the the major movements of Judaism in America in 1873. And interesting is that the Washington Avenue Temple, Congregation B'nai Israel in Evansville, was Congregation 1 in the Reform movement. The founder of Reform Judaism, Isaac Mayer Wise, came to Evansville, dedicated the synagogue, then went to Cincinnati, dedicated his synagogue. So we were there sort of from the beginning of Reform Judaism in America. And we have, if you walk into our oldest cemetery, which is actually located right next to the Evansville Country Club, you'll see the graves of the Gumberts family, the Hamburg family, some of these families that were here in the 1840s, really establishing Judaism in southern Indiana. And the next sort of major wave of Jewish immigration sort of happened in the 1880s, 1890s. Some of those Jews, the early Jews, came from Germany. The later Jews came from places like Russia and Poland and other places in Eastern Europe. They were more traditional in their practice. And when they came to America and saw that early Reform Judaism was very assimilated, it kind of went too far for them. And that was sort of how conservative Judaism started in America, sort of as a response, feeling that Reform Judaism had gone too far, but knowing that they needed to adapt to life in America. So they weren't Orthodox, which by definition means sort of one way. It is, strictly following Jewish law, dressing a certain way, eating a certain way, living a certain way. They weren't that, but they were definitely more traditional. So that started conservative Judaism. And at one point, there was an Orthodox synagogue as well called B'nai Moshe. They wound up closing, I think, in the 1940s or 50s. But Orthodox Judaism as a movement in America was sort of a response against conservative Judaism and Reform Judaism. Unfortunately, look, even if you go back to the time of Jesus, right? You had Pharisees, you had Sadducees, you had Essenes, and there were deep philosophical and theological differences. It seems like we've always had divisions, but certainly, even within the mainstream Protestant church, right? How many variations and differences
exactly.
are there?
Yeah, that, yeah.
I do believe, and I think our synagogue sort of shows this. So in 1980, the last two synagogues in Evansville merged. There was the conservative synagogue, which was Congregation Adath Israel, the Reform synagogue, which was Congregation B'nai Israel. Both had shrunk. They couldn't support, clergy, buildings. They merged together. They moved into the conservative synagogue's building, which was next to where St. Vincent's Hospital is now. Moved out of sort of the cathedral of, the Washington Avenue Temple. The only thing that remains from that building now is if you go to Patchwork Central, you can see that, one of the towers is still there. That's from the original synagogue. And they sort of joined and became one congregation. And, now, so many years later, we're in a newer building. We've moved sort of beyond the days of, I'm conservative and I'm Reformed. We're much more of a, non-Orthodox progressive congregation affiliated with the Reform movement. But I really think we're moving to a place in America where one of our leaders calls it sort of post-denominational Judaism, right? That as conservative has started, years and years ago, ordaining women, becoming much more open to the LGBTQ plus community, understanding they need to be more open to interfaith families because so many of our families are. We're moving closer and closer and closer together. I don't know that we'll ever officially merge, but we probably should, because it doesn't make sense for us to have independent movements and congregations, all of which are shrinking and struggling, when we could join our forces together and just serve the vast majority of America's Jewish community.
Yeah, it's probably unfair to ask this question because it's such a big question, but what do Christians in Evansville really need to know about Judaism?
Well, I think they need to know that this is their history, right? They need to know that Jesus was practicing Judaism, long before, there was, Christianity, and certainly long before the Catholic Church changed, so many of the rituals and customs and created the holidays. I think, for Christians, they know that there's an Old Testament. They should know that for us, we simply call it the Hebrew Bible. We don't have an Old Testament because we don't have a New Testament, right? So we have the Hebrew Bible. And there are 39 books in the Hebrew Bible, and we divide it into the Torah, the first 5 books. Then we have all the books of the prophets. And then we have the books of the writings, the later books, Chronicles and Ecclesiastes and the Book of Ruth. All the things that would go into the later writings are in the Book of Writings. 39 books in total. But we are guided by, what Christians would call the Old Testament. And much of what was sort of done away with in later Christianity, right, which were all the original Jewish holidays, are still the holidays that we celebrate, and the rhythm of time that we live by. Our holidays still follow a lunar calendar. Whereas once, Christianity comes about, then the solar calendar takes over. So for us, the Jewish holidays are as they've always been, according to the lunar calendar. The Sabbath is as it's always been, which was Saturday, starting Friday night, because in a lunar calendar, your holidays always start in the evening. So the day of rest is sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. We follow the rituals that you would find in the Old Testament. Obviously not all of them, because many of them were based around a time when there was a sacrificial system. Obviously, we don't do that anymore. And for Reformed Jews in particular, which is what we are in Evansville, we still consider the ethical, moral laws to be the guiding force. And the ritual laws in Reformed Judaism, individuals have a sense of personal autonomy, which first comes with education, right? People are supposed to understand what all the laws are about and then make educated choices as to, how they eat or how they dress or what they might observe at a certain time, not simply discard them. So I think those are all important, but I think the most important thing is that the foundational principles are the same, right? The ethical foundation of Judaism is the basis of Christianity, right? Leviticus 19 teaches us, the Hebrew is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, usually translated love your neighbor as yourself, with lots of definitions. Well, there are other ways that other traditions define that, right? That which is hateful, don't do to anyone else, do unto others. I mean, all those are variations of a theme. That theme is found in the Hebrew Bible, right? And so much of what I think guides, society and guides religions today are the foundational principles that are from the Hebrew Bible.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Well, I mean, kind of building on that, when Christians read the Old Testament Hebrew Bible and we encounter the word Israel, one of the questions I have is how should we think about the relationship between ancient Israel, the Jewish people today, and then the modern state of Israel? Help us distinguish there.
Yeah, and it's an important question, right? So in the Bible, right, Jacob wrestles with the angel, right? The sun is coming up, and Jacob says, I'm not going to let you go, until you bless me. And then the angel says, your name is no longer Jacob, but it will be Yisrael, which really is a loaded Hebrew word, which means to struggle with God, right? That's really what it means. And then to ultimately to prevail. And so Jacob's name now becomes Israel. Jacob is the patriarch of the Jewish people who are called Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. So the initial use of Israel biblically is simply denoting that we're from the line of Jacob, right? It's who we are as Jews. We are the children of Israel. And that phrase is used a lot as the Bible progresses, right? The term Jew comes from the tribe of Judah, which ultimately, takes over the main section of Israel when Israel is divided, the kingdom of Judah, and we become known as Jews. But Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, is how we're known in early biblical days, right? So much of our liturgy, because it comes from the Torah, like the Shema, which is, sort of our, the closest thing, I guess, to a creed that you would say within the Jewish tradition, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Well, in that case, Israel simply means the Jewish people. It's not about the land. It's certainly not about politics, right? It's about connection originally to Jacob and defining the lineage of the Jewish people, right? Israel then also becomes the land that the Jews are wandering towards through most of the Torah, right? 40 years. And, the goal is to get to the land of Israel, where the land is then divided among the tribes, again, of the children of Israel, defining us sort of as a people. So that becomes then the place where there's a physical locale that also then begins to be associated with the same name of who we are as a people. And that becomes sort of the dream, right? And it exists sort of as a dream for a long time, right? We know history. We're there, we're not there. We're there, we're exiled. We're there, we're exiled. I mean, there's this back and forth, relationship between the land where the patriarchs and matriarchs wandered, the land that was promised biblically, and the Jewish people who are sometimes there, sometimes not there, sometimes exiled, sometimes out in a diaspora. The modern state of Israel is its own thing, right? American Jews are not Israelis, right? Israel was founded, we know, in 1948. We know that Britain, who gained control after World War I, partitioned, it was called the Partition of Palestine, and there was to be a Jewish state, there was to be an Arab state. The UN bought in, and then in 1948, 3 years after World War II and post-Holocaust, the political leaders decided to declare the modern state of Israel, as for many reasons, but one of them simply as the only Jewish state in the world, the only place where if Jews are persecuted, that they could flee and find refuge, as well as reconnecting with our history in the historical land. And it has been fraught with difficulty and problems and wars and enemies. But American Jews are not Israelis, and American Jews have some pretty strong opinions, depending on who you talk to,
right.
about the the political system of the modern state of it. It's a very new democracy in a part of the world where democracy does not flourish, and it is deeply flawed. But subject for another podcast, we could say our democracy in this country is pretty deeply flawed as well, right? So Jews feel, I think, a natural connection to the land because of our history. And for many Jews, there's, also tremendous frustration and anxiety and disagreement with the politics. But, we have no say in the politics of Israel. We have no say in any other political system other than that in which we live.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you too, because I know in other contexts, Rabbi Gary, that there in your synagogue you have to take extra precautions to keep your people safe because of anti-Semitism. I want you to address that, because that's another thing that I think people need to know, is that this is something that you all live with daily.
Absolutely. Look, anti-Semitism in the last 3 years is at its highest level in the history of our country, right? And really around the world, and it is something we have to be aware of. And there are, it's a whole nother podcast to talk about the root causes of anti-Semitism and why it's flourishing today and how the political system we're living in contributes to that. I mean, it's a whole nother dialogue. The fact is, it's just a reality, right? And it has become, ever more a reality over these last few years than it ever has been, because hate is so much more a reality than it has been for so long in our country. And historically, Jews have always been on the losing end of hatred, bigotry, oppression, and persecution, for a whole host of reasons. Certainly in this country, after the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh, which, now is, 8 years ago or so, synagogues had to take much higher security precautions because there are always threats and always risks. Once that happened, synagogues said, okay, we need to be much more careful. And then after, the massacre of October 7th, and anti-Semitism around the world increased dramatically, we realized, and we, under the guidance of local law enforcement and several, Jewish organizations that monitor this, pretty much every synagogue in America had to lock its doors and install some kind of security. We get threats, unfortunately, often. So we have to hire off-duty Evansville police officers who are armed, who are fabulous, and who really, care about us. But every time we have a gathering, whether it's a worship service or a program or, even a lecture in the building, we have to have security. And we have to bear the cost of that, which is tremendous, as does every synagogue pretty much in America at this time. When people want to come to worship, if they just want to come off the street, we can't let them in. People need to register in advance. It's a one-time process on our website. The police want to vet everybody once, so people upload their license, then they get put on our visitors list, and then they can come in at any time. Synagogues and mosques, unfortunately, need to do this across the country. There have been recent threats. There have been threats on my life, my family, on the synagogue, and I have to then notify, law enforcement. There's some legal proceedings I'm not going to get into, which have been going on in our community, and it's, it is an unfortunate reality of being a rabbi and being in a synagogue today, that now we have to deal with these threats on an ongoing basis. And again, it's very sad, because I don't know about your church, but I know when I go and visit and go to speak at other churches, I walk in the door. I ask somebody where I'm supposed to go, and nobody gives it a second thought.
Right.
Yeah. We can't do that here.
Well, when I think about Christianity, I don't think that Christianity is anti-Semitic. There are anti-Semitic Christians, but we even have to be careful with our scriptures, because there is a way to read the New Testament that can sound anti-Semitic. And so what Pastor and Andy and I have to do is, that's a teaching moment for us to say, it might sound like that, but that's really not what's beneath that. So do you ever struggle with that idea about Christianity and it's living together with Judaism like that?
What I struggle with, we have the same issue with our text. The Torah is, 4,000 or 5,000 years old, right? The New Testament is over 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with, we always have to understand the historical context in which these documents came to be. And we need to then filter that out to try to get to what the lesson is, right? The Torah talks about slavery and indentured servitude. The Torah talks about, women as second-class citizens. The Torah talks about, its own sense of bias and discrimination against others. So we have to use those as teachable moments to understand what used to be historical that's no longer accepted in modern society. Where I struggle with other religions is with the ignorance, right? It's with the stereotypes. It's with when I have a Christian group come into the synagogue, and a middle school kid raises their hand and says, "Why did you guys kill Jesus?" Where I realize, okay, there's a lack of education either happening in this church or happening in this home, and those are then teachable moments to deal with some of the stereotypes and misconceptions. My issue is never with educated, well-meaning clergy or congregations, right? It's usually with people who are ignorant of the understanding and the teachings, and then there's just a lot of education that has to take place.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it is historical context. You have to, what does it mean for the person or persons that wrote this, the community that wrote this? And it can be a challenge sometimes, though, because there are some very difficult texts to deal with and helping people through that.
Difficult texts.
Yeah.
And look, the difficulty is when somebody is so adamant in their faith and equally so uneducated in its understanding that they hold up their text and they say, this is what it says, and they pull, they cherry pick. Pull verses and passages out of context, adamantly saying, this is what this means, when I know that that isn't what it means. And I can try to have an educational moment. It's not always successful.
I love that Israel means struggling with God, and it's something that I came to really kind of too late in my life. I wish I had come to this earlier, because I was raised where I wanted certainty on everything, and there were people who would make things certain for me. But it's really more of the struggle, right? And the whole rabbinic tradition, as I understand it, is to struggle with these texts.
right? To struggle with the text and struggle with each other, and struggle with the interpretation of the text, right? The reason that we're called the people of the book is because we kept struggling with the text and with one another, and we kept writing books, sort of that would detail the struggle. If you've ever, my guess is you've never opened up a page of the Talmud, but if you ever find the Talmud and you kind of look at the English translation, it is rabbis over hundreds of years, different schools of thought, struggling with the minutia of what does this really mean?
Right.
And how do we practice it? And using stories, experiences, and all of these argumentations, are considered, these are argumentations for a higher purpose, right? Because we're struggling to try to understand the text and ultimately arrive at truth, however we define that. But it's not easy, and there is no necessarily one way. And for every decision they render in the Talmud about a particular Jewish law, it's like the Supreme Court, the minority and dissenting opinion gets in there as well. And if you hold on to the dissenting opinion, you're not necessarily wrong. You're just in the minority.
That's very interesting. It's too bad there's not a reading plan for reading the Talmud in 1 year.
Well, actually, it's a 7-year.
Yeah, I was going to say, take a while. Yeah.
Yeah. There are some online groups that every 7 years go through, and they send a little passage every day to your inbox. And there are, thousands and thousands of Jewish people that take advantage of this. And at the end of 7 years, they've made it through. They don't necessarily understand it, but they've made it through sort of the entire study of the Talmud.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what led to this conversation today was that we had lunch last week, and I asked you a question about Leviticus text. I think it was, let me see, Leviticus 25:10. It's on the plaque that was over our time capsule here at the church, and it read, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all the inhabitants." And then it's, of course, on the Liberty Bell as well. But my question was, help me understand this from a Jewish perspective, and I'm sure there's multiple ways. Yeah.
Well, again, you got to look at it in context.
Right.
Again, this is the problem. A verse was taken out of context. And if you ask most Americans who go and visit the Liberty Bell, what does that text mean? They're going to talk about, liberty and justice for all. They're going to recite the Pledge of Allegiance. They're going to talk about personal freedoms in America. They're going to talk about, their understanding of liberty. And that's exactly what the text means, which has nothing to do with what the text originally meant, right?
Right.
So it comes, first of all, it comes in the midst, it's in the book of Leviticus, and it's in the midst of the discussion about the sabbatical year and then the Jubilee, right? So the sabbatical year, every 7 years, right, you would let the land rest, right? There would be, a return of property to the land, and then after 7 times of 7 sabbaticals, right? It leads up to in the 50th year, which was the Jubilee. And the Jubilee was all about release, right? If you had unsettled debts, they were released in the Jubilee year. If you had, we know that the Bible talks about slaves and also talks about indentured servants, right? If someone sold themselves into servitude, that agreement, they are released in the 50th year, right? Also, if you were evicted from your land or if you leased your ancestral property, it returns to you in the 50th year. It was a release of all those agreements. But, the bigger underarching principle of this whole idea of release is to teach a lesson that ultimately, as human beings, we don't own anything. Everything belongs to God. Right. And after a period of time, even the things that we think we own, we realize, we really didn't own them. We had them for a period of time, but everything ultimately returns to God and belongs to God, and we start over.
That reminds me, it's kind of like a little death, right? I mean, we have these things, and then like at death, we lose everything. We lose all those possessions.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is, I think that the Bible's teaching us the ultimate lesson that we come into this world with nothing and we leave this world with nothing, and then everything that we have along the way, everything ultimately belongs to God.
Yeah, every question we've asked you, Rabbi Gary, could be another podcast or another seminar. But I want to ask one. I did this with the first guest that we had. A little cheating for my sermon preparation. I'm going to be in our current sermon series on freedom, based on the month of July and the Independence Day celebration. I'm going to preach from Exodus, and so I haven't selected my passage. So, in a nutshell, what can we learn from the book of Exodus about freedom as we exercise it today?
So, Exodus, we talk about liberation, we talk about redemption, right? And we talk about, that God certainly frees us from slavery. But for us, when we look at the whole book of Exodus, we look at the fact that we are physically freed, right? So God redeems us from slavery, brings us into the desert. Physically, we have the miracle at the sea. We're physically free, but we're not really freed until the revelation of Mount Sinai. That physical freedom means nothing without spiritual freedom. And spiritual freedom only comes with this relationship with God and this understanding of the ethics and morals in which we're supposed to live. So that the true freedom occurs once we're given the Ten Commandments and Torah on Mount Sinai. Then we truly become liberated. Right? We've moved on from the idolatry and the pagan ways of Egypt because we were enslaved for hundreds of years. We understand what God wants us to do. And we understand that our lives are, now a journeying towards God and a journeying towards shifting our lives and living the way God wants us to live. And that ultimately, that's what freedom is all about.
Nice. Thank you.
Well, you got your sermon, Pastor.
I do. Yeah. I got to start on it.
That'll preach.
Appreciate it.
Oh, man. That's beautiful. I just love that. Yeah. Nice. I have so many questions, Rabbi Gary. But, and I don't want to, I know we could go on all kinds of other podcasts, but do you have any questions maybe for us to reverse the table a little bit?
I'm on your show. You're right.
You're being nice. So, oh man.
Well, our lives have been enriched. Our faith has been enriched by our relationship with you and the Jewish community here in Evansville.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Well,
you're an inspiration.
I appreciate that. But it's so important that we all work together and understand one another. Mm-hmm. Again, I think that in many ways, our synagogue and maybe me needs to play a little bit of an outsized role in this community because we're the only game in town for the Jewish community. So if we don't involve ourselves, in all the education that we do and bringing all the groups in the schools and everything to the synagogue, all the interfaith efforts that I try to involve myself in, if we don't do this, and if I don't do this, the community doesn't understand who we are, and doesn't understand the commonality. And if we want to sort of get the message, and I think at least the three of us try to preach this, we are all in this together, right? We do share much more in common than what divides our lives. My life is richer having you two and having the interfaith partners that I've made relationships with be a part of it. Mm-hmm. Right?
Amen. Yeah.
So, and we have to, as religious leaders in this community, we have to model that. Mm-hmm. Because if we want our folks to do that, they have to see us doing that. And then we have to figure out ways that we can bring our communities together and do that more. And then, what do? Together, we focus on the things that need to get done in our community. We partner with the organizations and agencies that need our help. We make a stronger, more faithful community, and it's to the betterment of everyone, and we have to do that together.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. Well, we could go on and on and on, as you said. These could build their own podcasts of their own, each and every one of these questions. So it's been so good to have you. I'm sure we haven't covered all the ground that we could have covered, but we'll have you back.
Thank you. Yeah.
We'll have you back, Rabbi Gary.
Well, I appreciate it, and I look forward to that. And and I look forward to continuing, our relationship, individually, and our relationship as, two congregations. It's great that you guys are doing this, and thanks for inviting me to be a part of it.
Absolutely.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. All right, let's close this out, Pastor Andy, with a preview of this Sunday and the message then.
Oh, well, last week was freedom to love. This week is going to be freedom to pray, and we're going to talk about just ways to cultivate our prayer life.
Great.
And so try to build on where we started last week.
Another good series. We're going to enjoy that and look forward to it,
Sure.
Pastor Andy. All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you for listening to our podcast and watching it. We hope that you're getting something useful out of this, and it's time well spent. We appreciate the fact that you've taken the time. Have a great week, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you for listening to the Pastor Podcast with Randy and Andy. We hope you'll join us next week. We see Christ in you.